Today, I'd like to continue our journey through chapter 10 of the Gospel of Matthew. We're in the section where Jesus is talking about the importance in discipleship of putting your commitment to Jesus first, your commitment to the gospel first, and kind of putting aside the other distractions that you might have in your life. And that, of course, is a challenge for all of us because we get caught up in everyday activities and we can lose sight and focus of following Jesus and of the gospel. So Jesus in verse 38 of chapter 10 says, "And whoever does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me." So Jesus is saying to become worthy of following him, we have to give that full commitment. We have to take up our cross. We have to follow Jesus as best we can in the circumstances of our life. And that, of course, is a challenge for all of us. This is really interesting that it is the first mention of the cross in Matthew. It refers first to the disciples and then to Jesus. Interesting how Jesus puts it, that you take up your cross, you follow me, and the idea of that's your challenge. You take up the cross, and I will be then taking up my cross. So you have a cross, I will have a cross, but it's interesting here the disciples come first. The cross was the form of capital punishment for those who were not Roman citizens. So if you were a Roman citizen, you could avoid this form of punishment. But for non-citizens, it was legal, it was allowed to be enacted. Used primarily the cross for two groups of people. It was used for rebels to put down anyone who would think of, God forbid, threatening the authority of the state. So the state was almighty, and you just didn't challenge that. And if you wanted to overthrow the state, and in this case, of course, in Israel at the time, it was the Romans. If you wanted to do that, well, the cross was your punishment. Second group were the slaves, and they were very conscious of trying to avoid a slave rebellion, the importance of the slaves for the society and for the economy. And so, because of that, if the slaves engaged in any plotting or any thoughts of throwing off their servitude, the punishment was the cross. This does not refer to accepting suffering. Sometimes we hear the line interpreted, well, you're going to have suffering, you're going to have your cross, and this is not the context that Matthew is speaking of. Not that, of course, some people might take that interpretation about the sufferings that we have and offering those sufferings up, and those sufferings becoming a cross for us. But this is not Matthew's reference here. But really, to accept the persecutions that will come our way if we follow Jesus. And it's inevitable. The early church saw those persecutions. So if you are a true follower of Jesus, there are going to be times when you'll be persecuted, you'll be put down, you could be imprisoned, and even, of course, put to death, which we saw in the early church and we see today around the world, that type of persecution. So that's what's really referred to here by Matthew. And also the sacrifices that we need to make in proclaiming the gospel. That this is not going to be easy. You wonder sometimes, as you reflect on some of these passages in the Gospel of Matthew, how Jesus attracted any followers at all. I mean, Jesus minces no words here. He says this is going to be difficult. It's going to involve suffering. It's going to involve persecution. It's going to involve sacrifices. This is not going to be an easy life for you. Not really something that we would think of that in today's terms that would attract a lot of followers. And so Jesus is very honest. He is saying this is going to be difficult, it's going to be a challenge, and even today, as we look at being a Christian, we know the sacrifices that we have to make. And are we willing to make those sacrifices? Sometimes it might mean refusing a very fine job, lucrative job with a nice salary, but because we don't think that that is appropriate. Sometimes it might mean leaving a job where there are things that involve a moral compromise. A friend of mine who faced that decision over working for a tobacco company, knowing that his product was doing harm to people. He was like, I can't continue with this. And very difficult. Sometimes you're making a nice salary, you have a family to support, and you have to make that decision. But you're saying, well, what would Jesus do in this situation? What does it mean to follow Jesus in this situation? What does it mean to embrace the gospel in this situation? And if I'm embracing the gospel and following Jesus, I can't be promoting something which is antithetical to the gospel, and something that really is harmful and dangerous to people. I can't promote that in my life. So I make that decision to step away from that, and that's going to have a financial impact on my life and the life of my family. It can be very difficult, and very hard decision to make. There is no extreme to which they may think that faith and the proclamation of the gospel will not take them. So when you get involved in proclaiming the gospel, there are going to be many difficult situations that you will face, many hard challenges that are going to come your way. I was reading an article today about his sister, Sister Mary Fitzgibbon, who founded the Foundling Hospital in New York, and she faced a very difficult situation. She was starting with $5 back in the 1860s. $5 worth a little bit more, but a really hard situation. And they put a crib out in front of this house that they were renting, and babies came, and then other children came, and they took care of them, and eventually it really changed into a situation where they got some funding from the state and they're able to expand, but very difficult decisions that they had to make to take care of young children who were being abandoned at the time, and to dedicate their life to that mission, which was not at the time a very popular mission at all, because this was accepted. The children were abandoned, and young children were left homeless. A very difficult situation, but she said, no, this is not right. This is not what Jesus would want. So she decided to make that decision to found a hospital to take care of children. Jesus says in verse 39, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So again, Jesus challenging us even further. Verse 38, we're taking up our cross. Now we have to lose our life. That's like, Jesus is demanding here. To be a disciple is not going to be easy. So if you desire Jesus in order to save your earthly life, you will be condemned to everlasting destruction if that's your motive. You want to save your life here. No, Jesus is saying it involves a loss of life. Loss of earthly life for Jesus' sake will be rewarded by everlasting life in the kingdom. So we lose our life. We lose our life in the sense that we're dedicating it completely to Jesus. It's not our life. It's Jesus' life that we want to live as close to Jesus as possible, as close to the gospel, embracing the gospel as completely as we can. The word that is used is psyche in Greek, and it is used here in the sense of the Hebrew scriptures, and really should be rendered as self, not as soul or as life. The Hebrew, the idea of the integration of body and soul. the oneness. And the preservation of the person is achieved only by yielding the person entirely to Jesus. So how do we become a true person? How do we become authentic? How do we find true happiness and true peace? Jesus says it's simple. Abandon yourself to Jesus. Become one with Jesus. Know Jesus. Love Jesus. Follow his example of loving God and loving our sisters and brothers. And when we do that, we achieve personhood. We become a true person. Those other things that we try that become distractions seem to be so wonderful. The nice house, nice car, nice boat, the luxuries of life. We think that, well, that will make me a person. Jesus says no. A person is to abandon that and to follow me. So Jesus, in his own day, gave a very challenging message to the disciples. In our day, in time right now, he's giving us that same very challenging